We've got one last person who snuck in. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get kicked off. So welcome everyone to ACMP SoCal's May the 4th Be With You event. We are here today. We're going to have a presentation on change saturation, and we're going to be having Dr. Holly Burkett actually be our presenter. So I wanted to give us a quick little intro about Holly, but before that, we're going to go ahead and move to what we offer as ACMP. So wanted to just give you an overview real quickly of what we are offering as a community. So we do have professional development events just like this. We also offer keynote speaker opportunities just like this. Discounts to exclusive events. So we do have some upcoming events this summer that will be happening. So we'll let you know about those a little bit further in the slide deck. We also have sponsorship opportunities. So if we have an event opportunity, a face-to-face event usually, that you would like to sponsor, we do offer that as a possibility as well. We also have networking, professional certifications, definitely have some volunteer opportunities, and I think we actually have some positions that may be open that if you are interested in volunteering with ACMP SoCal, please let us know. And then we also host an ACMP event at your facility, which is a joint venture that we do with some of our sponsors. So wanted to just let you guys know what's out there and what we do offer as a community. So if we can move real quick to the next slide. Some of our upcoming events for this summer. So we do want to let folks know about ACMP Global Connect, which is this year's Change Management ACMP conference. That's going to be June 8th through the 11th. So if you haven't registered for the event, you can go to acmpconference.org and register for this year's event coming up soon. We are also going to have on July 12th a recap of our conference favorites. So we typically, the folks from our community who go to the conference volunteer some time and some expertise and provide an overview of their favorite sessions. So if you are going to ACMP Global this year and you would like to share your favorites as part of our event in July, please let me know. My name is Shauna Gale, and you can connect with me, and I would be happy to add you to our list of folks to speak on that event. And then also July 13th through 16th, we are doing a joint with Change Fit 360, which is one of the providers for change certification and hours that you would need to qualify for your CCMP. So we have a program with them that's going on, and that is July 13th through 16th. You can find more information on our website, which is at the bottom of the slide. So if we could go one more. So we wanted to let folks know Learn, Connect, and Celebrate is our tagline. And so that's our access point to acmpsocalchapter.org. Also, pound ACMP SoCal is our tag. And also we wanted to let folks know that you can also find us on LinkedIn at ACMP Southern California Group. So you can join us there to have some ongoing dialogue post-session. So Anka, I will turn it over to you for annotation.
Here is your technical part of the preparation. Hi, everybody. So good to see so many familiar faces and names on the list here. We will be using a feature of the Zoom portal that we haven't used much. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody is familiar and can feel included and participate. So why don't we practice? We'll do a virtual quick poll. So I will ask you right now, you or your Baby Yoda representative, Carl, that can work too. If you move your mouse to the very top of the screen where you see the view options, and select annotate. Drop that annotate bar that should look like there on the picture onto your view. Click on stamp and pick your symbol. So pick your favorite stamp. Then when we move to the next slide, that will be actual virtual poll. I will ask you to place your stamp on the side of your choice. Everybody ready? Let's do the next slide. So here is the question for the day. I'm so glad we're recording this. Oh, okay. We'll give folks another second. Did everybody figure out? Yep, I think everybody got multiple stamps. I think we're good here. So thank you so much. Remember those instructions. You'll need that later for a different picture. Let's clear those. And I think we're ready to move to the next slide. Thank you.
All right. So we want to welcome Holly Burkett. She is going to be our presenter tonight, and she's going to be covering leading change when your employees are lean, mean, and out of steam. So welcome, Holly, and thank you so much for joining us tonight and for volunteering to present this topic. Holly is a principal of Evaluation Works, a performance consultancy in Davis, California. She's been there for 20 years. And she has helped diverse organizations improve and impact strategic culture change, talent development, and performance improvement initiatives. She's passionate about developing resilient leadership capabilities that enable high engagement and operational excellence. And these include formerly with Apple, clients SIVA Foundation, the Bar of California, sorry, the State Bar of California, the National Park Service, and Chevron. The Bar of California sounds better, right?
Yeah.
And so we would like to welcome her this evening as our keynote. So I'm going to just kind of hand it right over to her since we've got a lot of material to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and transition to you, Holly. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Shauna. Thanks, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and grateful to all of you who took time out of your evening to join our conversation tonight about change saturation and change fatigue. As change leaders, change practitioners, we've probably all had the experience at one time or another of trying to lead change in environments where employees may be lean, mean, and out of steam. So what I'm going to be asking you to do tonight, encouraging you to share your own experience and your own input as we go through our content, and you can speak up through unmuting yourself or through the chat. But I want to start with what we already know to be true about change fatigue, because this is something we've all experienced at one time or another. So let's go ahead and dive in. When you consider your experience with change fatigue and dealing with employees that are stretched, lean, mean, and out of steam, what's one thing that you can say for sure about this phenomenon? If you are reporting out to your stakeholders, to your sponsors, to other change professionals, what's one thing you know for sure about change fatigue? And you can either take yourself off mute or drop it in chat. But what's one thing that stands out for you as something to be true about change fatigue? Take yourself off mute or drop in chat. Decreases performance. Thanks, Vera. It's not made up. Anna, thanks, Lisa. Everyone's feeling it. We're all feeling it. Thanks, Brenda. Carl, it's a learned behavior, says Carl. Well, we'll talk about that, Carl. It's worse at night, says Anna. Okay. The struggle is real, says Karen. All right. Anything else that you know to be true about change fatigue? One more.
I would say that it's catching.
It's contagious. Yes, good point. All right, well, let's take what we know and it's perceived as negative. All right, good, Carlos. So we'll talk about the perceptions of change fatigue, including perceptions about it being a learned behavior. So thanks for that, folks. So let's start with what we know to be true about change fatigue. It is getting worse. We're all feeling it. And all of our people in our organizations are at a higher risk of change fatigue now than they've ever been before. At exactly a time when organizations are trying to introduce more change to reset and regroup and renew for the next normal, employees and organizations have reached a saturation point where they're beyond the capacity to absorb any more change. Gartner Research, which is an HR research firm, estimates that employees' ability to absorb change is less than half of what it was 1 year ago at this time. So organizations are introducing more change, and employees' capacity to absorb change is significantly dropping. So one thing we know for sure is that it's not going away. And as change leaders, we play an important role in helping our organizations come up with strategies, tips, and tools to identify risk issues and to mitigate those risk issues as best as possible through the change management and change leadership strategies that we deploy. So what we're going to do is look at some contributing factors to change fatigue and burnout, and then kind of talk through tips and tools. And again, I know each of you have got unique experience in this area, so I want to hear from you and want you to be able to have a chance to share with each other about what you've learned. So change fatigue and burnout typically are words that get interchanged. Burnout is sometimes listed as a symptom of change fatigue. Change fatigue is really more about the stress that comes from repeat demands from concurrent overlapping change projects where people feel like they just can't keep up. There's too much going on and they just can't manage the urgency and the false sense of burning platform that goes with every single project. So does that sort of square with what you all think of when you think of change fatigue? Would anybody add anything more to that? It's more when people just feel tapped out because the demands from all these different projects are just coming at you and you can't keep up. Is that pretty consistent with what you believe change fatigue to be? Okay. So burnout, however, is much more broad. Burnout is more of a chronic stress condition that was characterized by a disease with the World Health Organization in 2016. Burnout has become what some are calling an epidemic in today's workplace. How many of you guys have heard or seen reference to the burnout epidemic or know a little bit about that? I can't see everybody's hand, but yeah, okay, some of you are putting your hands up, right. So with the burnout epidemic, what we're experiencing here are symptoms related to exhaustion, fatigue, and burnout has really accelerated as a result of COVID. Typically, burnout is resulting from the chronic stress of the workplace related to being always on, heavy workloads, difficult deadlines, the sense that there's no balance between work and home and that you can't really escape. So those are some of the contributing factors to burnout when it was first introduced as a disease. But with COVID, it's really amplified. What we know about the impact of COVID upon burnout is that even more than ever before, employees are just tired, they're exhausted. Sleeplessness is a huge condition and a huge contributing factor to exhaustion. Employees are more sad because of COVID. They're generally, I can't see my screen here. They're more confused due to COVID. They're more unproductive due to COVID. And burnout generally contributes to all of these issues too. But again, the pandemic has just accelerated all of these issues. And then one of the key characteristics that's significant to us as change practitioners is with burnout, there's more increased mental distance from one's job, creating a situation where more and more employees are disengaged. There are lots of studies out there on engagement. I know many of you are probably heavily involved in engagement initiatives. By Gallup's estimates, 70% of all employees in the US are not engaged. So when you factor in things like change fatigue, burnout, and then just the complication of the pandemic, it's really difficult to have a situation where we can engage employees to commit to a new change effort and commit to new change demands when they're tired, sad, confused, unproductive, and just disconnected from the job. So one of the things that we need to recognize when we're trying to manage this and help our leaders get beyond it is we really need to be clear on what it is and what it is not. So when we look at burnout, what it is a chronic stress condition. It's characterized by cynicism, exhaustion, mental distance from one's job, and it's a product of unsuccessfully being able to manage that kind of chronic stress. Just people just don't know how to manage it well. It is a situation that costs US over $300 billion a year in lost productivity and absenteeism, accidents, substance abuse, lack of engagement. So it's a difficult problem. It's become an epidemic. And what it is not is just the inability to manage stress. Sometimes there's a tendency to minimize burnout and say, if you could only buck up, if you only get a grip, if you could only get more mindful, if you can only get more resilient, practice yoga, walk around the block, take 10-minute breaks. That is not anything related to burnout. That it is not ineffective stress management. It is a chronic stress condition brought about by stress in the workplace. So it is not something where people just get stressed 1 or 2 times a day, but it's prolific, prolonged stress. And the issue for us as change practitioners is that star performers really tend to be more prone to burnout than other employees, because star performers are those employees that really want to exceed expectations, that really want to be perfectionists. So if you're always striving to exceed expectations or be perfect, you're going to tend to put yourself in a position where you're going to get tired more frequently. You're going to have more opportunities to create stress for yourself. And the other scary thing about this phenomenon is that women in particular with COVID now are more disproportionately affected by burnout, because they're more likely to be trying to balance work life and home life. And women in this COVID era tend to leave the workplace 3 times more frequently than other employees. So when we look at building our leadership bench strength, looking at our talent pipeline, looking at who's going to fill positions, trying to be more equitable, trying to break the glass ceiling, we need to be sensitive to all of the issues related to attracting star performers and helping women get through some of the issues and barriers that they may experience in the workplace. And so those are real issues related to burnout. So what can we do about that? Well, we know that exhaustion is only getting more and more the norm today. Some of you have probably read about the research from a Stanford professor on Zoom exhaustion. How many of you guys have seen that or heard about that? So briefly, what this is about is just saying that because we've had more and more video conferences, virtual meetings, given the social distancing requirements, people are just getting tapped out on Zoom as well. It's that always being on camera, the prolonged eye contact, the lack of mobility. All of those things create a sense of exhaustion that only makes it worse if you're already feeling exhausted and stressed about your job, your economy, the turmoil in the world, your health, the health and safety of your loved ones. So all of those things are just constant stressors today that are contributing to burnout. The other thing that if you're not exhausted by Zoom, then a new term that some of you may have seen recently, if you've seen it, you might want to put your thumbs up or raise your hands. Adam Grant did an article in April on, this is May, okay. Did an article last month in the New York Times about the concept of languishing. And languishing is really kind of what they're calling now as a name for the blahs. So again, if you think about trying to excite and inspire employees towards a new change or a new process or a new vision, if they're feeling tired and exhausted and burnout, if they're feeling blah, it becomes even more of an issue and more of an uphill battle. And what Grant is saying in his article is that it may be our predominant emotion for 2021. It's really that sense of being empty, of being stagnant. You're sort of betwixt and between. You're not really depressed, but you're just blah. You're just aimless. You're just joyless. So how do you get people inspired and joyful about new change if they're feeling blah, if they're feeling fatigued, if they're feeling burnout? The main issue here with languishing is that, and this goes, I think to one of the points that was in the chat earlier, is that it's not merely in our heads, It's in our circumstances. And we have to get better at rethinking how we view the health and well-being of our employees. And mental health is a huge crisis in today's workplace. I don't know how many of your organizations have been looking at well-being as a key initiative, or looking at well-being initiatives as something that you're leading for change efforts. But well-being has risen to the forefront in the line of sight for most CEOs today, because employees want to be assured that their well-being is going to be taken into account when they return to the workplace. And the circumstances in which people work have a great deal to do with how they're able to survive and thrive in those environments. So languishing, between Zoom exhaustion, between burnout, between change fatigue, it's really no surprise that most employees today are just running on empty, right? So again, think about what we need from employees when we ask them to get on board with change. Any change effort, small or large scale, any change effort requires some expenditure of energy. Yet, what we know about fatigue and burnout and Zoom exhaustion and languishing is that the energy is depleted. It's just not there. The tank is empty. So energy is the X factor that we really need to take into account in today's workplace when we're trying to drive and lead change, because that's the factor that's going to ignite people and get people on board to perform and adopt to new behaviors. And we're not just talking about energy on one level, but we're talking about physical, emotional, mental, and a spiritual energy across all levels, because that's the kind of commitment we need from people, because people bring their whole selves to work, right? So just let me stop for a moment. What are your thoughts about the notion of energy and just the importance of addressing energy as a key factor in leading and igniting change? Thoughts, shout out, drop in chat. Like the Eskimos have 100 words for snow, yes. Any other thoughts?
Energy is important, but sometimes change can be the motivator to create more energy, right? If people are in favor of the change or it's something they've been looking for.
If they're not already tapped out, it can be, yes. But if people are in the sense of languishing in particular, one of the key characteristics is that it creates a sense of mental fog. Mm-hmm. Burnout is the same way. You're confused, you're unproductive.
Just so exasperation over, oh, another new thing.
Right. So it's hard to think about the positive benefits of a change if you're in a fog.
I liken it to when you're so stuffed, you can't even think of food.
Right.
Even
right.
like the most delicious food, you're like, oh, get that away from me.
Right. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, that's a good example.
I don't know. Right. You always have space for dessert, Vera. Always.
Yeah. So yeah, those are great examples. Thank you for that. So when you're looking at where your folks are in relation to the commitments and the behaviors that you're asking, ask yourself whether you're really viewing resistance or fatigue. Because fatigue comes across as resistance. People not paying attention, feeling apathetic, being distant from the job. That can all look like resistance, but it may be more fatigue than resistance, right? So that's why it's really important to understand the what and why of burnout and how prevalent it is and how much it impacts people's willingness to commit. Because many times with resistance, we treat that as a negative, and we look at it as a willpower or motivation issue, when really we need to look at, okay, is this an energy issue? Is this an energy deficit? And how can we fix that? So with the energy analogy and with change fatigue, what we're saying is that this whole notion of addressing it as a readiness issue begins by looking at it as a capacity component of change leadership. So if you look at how ProSci defines saturation, and the PMI, Project Management Institute, defines saturation. What we're saying is that organizations or people get saturated when there's so many disruptive changes that people don't have the capacity to absorb them, to adopt them, right? And so the capacity issue is one that, again, we tend to overlook or underestimate when we're managing a change project. We focus a lot on building commitment by trying to increase awareness and desire, by trying to build that willpower. We focus a lot on trying to create knowledge and ability and promote skills and skill power. One thing, if you don't get anything else out of tonight, what I really hope that you walk away with is the sense that effective change management really is not only about influencing the skill and the will, but addressing the hills that many people experience in the workplace. And burnout and change fatigue and change saturation are workplace circumstances, workplace hills that go beyond the capacity of single individuals. They're cultural issues that need to be addressed. No matter how much capacity an individual has to absorb change, prolonged exposure to an environment where they're getting repeatedly hammered with change and repetitive change and concurrent change and demands for change will erode their individual capacity. So it really is an organizational systems issue that goes beyond just looking at individuals. So that's really what I hope, I hope that you'll take away, is that we do a lot with will, we do a lot with skill, but addressing the hills and looking at capacity as a hill issue in our readiness planning, I think will do a lot as to help influence our role as strategic change leaders. So Lisa, thank you. I'm glad that you like that. Yeah. All right. So one place to start is just by knowing where some of your risk issues are. So Anka gave us a great overview of our annotation tools. So hopefully you all know where your annotation tools are. But if you can pick a tool, a stamp, and then using this chart, kind of place whether you agree or disagree with each statement. There's 5 statements here that are part of a typical burnout risk assessment. So where do you see yourself relative to these statements? Okay, so lots of people agreeing that people have trouble with boundaries, constant state of change. Okay, some people are agreeing that their employees have input on how work gets done, so that's great. So that's seems like it's a little bit of a mixed bag there. Okay, disagree on job, more disagree on the job distribution than agree. Stress levels low, most people disagree with that. So yeah, so that's not surprising if you think about everything people are dealing with now, that stress levels are still high. Okay, well good. So we're going to talk through some ways that effective change leadership and capacity building can help you minimize these risks. Thanks for doing that. Anka, can you clear our little stamps for us? Great, thank you. All right, so what we know about addressing change capacity as a readiness issue is that boosting organizational resilience is one of the best ways to address that. And organizations that have really done well in looking at system-wide organizational resilience beyond the scope of just individual resiliency training, mindfulness beyond that, but looking at it in terms of policies, procedures, paid leave, all kinds of things that support employees' well-being, that those organizations see increases in morale, engagement, retention. What we know about focusing on organizational prevention of burnout and focusing on improving resilience is that there's a strong ROI. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a study that showed there was a potential $2.30 return for every dollar spent on resiliency practices. And again, it's not just practices geared towards individuals, but it's effective workplace practices like performance management, vacation leave, parental leave, time off, all of that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about some good examples of that going forward. So it does pay off by focusing on resilience. Resilience is a key factor in mitigating some of these stress issues. What we know about resilience is that the key feature of resilience on both an individual and organizational level is adaptation. So resilience is another word that's been kind of a buzzword lately. A lot of people talk about it. It gets associated with things like grit. Grit is more related to perseverance with a task or a project over time. Agility gets connected with resilience sometimes. Agility is more about the ability to pivot and change course in light of changing conditions. Resilience is unique from those because it focuses on healthy adaptation to stressors or disruption. Adaptation here is about the ability to withstand disruption or stress, the ability to not only bounce back from disruption or stress on an organization or individual level, but also bounce forward and to actually come out of it stronger than ever before, to thrive in the face of disruption or stress. So that's really what distinguishes resilience from things like grit or agility. And what we know about the importance of resilience is that most organizations globally are saying that that's a trait, adaptability, which is a key component of resilience, is something that is really important for staying competitive and surviving and thriving going forward in the next normal. And most CEOs have ranked resilience as kind of their strategic must-have characteristic. So organizations that are effective at building resilience kind of have all of these characteristics. They have unity of purpose, they have strong culture and leadership, they have strong networks and relationships, and they spend a lot of time focusing on change readiness because all organizations are in a change is the name of the game. So we're going to start looking at some of the factors related to unity of purpose and culture and leadership. So organizations that are effective at buffering change and helping employees be more responsive to change are ones where leaders can inspire trust through a sense of shared purpose and shared meaning and shared values. So trust is a key component of building an effective culture. So if you think about your organization, and if you're not in an organization, if you're a consultant, maybe think about the organization that you consult with most, or organization, your kind of overall your experience with organizations. But what are your thoughts? Do you mostly agree or mostly disagree about how good your organization leaders are at establishing that level of trust and transparency? So you can shout it out or drop it in chat. Trust and leadership, Carl says, is a learned behavior. Okay, so.
And we're using stamps too.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Stamps are good. People like the stamps. I like the stamps. Okay, so a lot of people agreeing. That's fantastic. All right, good. I'm liking the agrees. Some more agrees than disagrees. That's interesting. Okay, so for those of you that said agree, any one of you want to shout out how you believe, an example of how you do establish that trust and transparency? Anybody? Can we get one example? Anybody?
So I will offer up an example, Holly.
Okay.
In one of the environments in which I work, we had an incident that brought down a system. And when our senior most leaders communicated with us as an organization. They brought everyone together to discuss it, and they brought our key customer with them, which
Oh my gosh.
so we actually heard directly from our key customer as to the impacts that the customers and the businesses felt with regard to what happened with the incident. So that was something that was very trust building. It was very transparent.
That's a great example. Thanks, Shauna. Yeah, good. Well, it's good because, you know, we tend to underestimate, again, the importance of trust. But two key strategies tonight that best practice organizations and research tell us that will help build capacity and resilience and prevent and combat change fatigue are trust and connection. So we're starting with trust. But you may be surprised to learn that employees who report high trust have an average capacity for change that is 2.6 times greater than those with low trust. So let that sink in. So what that tells you is that people who may be uncertain about the way forward, who may be uncertain about their security, if they trust that their leader is leading from a place of authenticity and a good heart, they're more likely to get on board. So important fact, anything you can do and anything you can share with one another that has helped you grow that trust and transparency will help you grow your capacity as well. I want to give you a couple examples here. There are many, many examples, and I'm so glad that you guys have examples among yourselves. These are two examples that are from an article, Nurturing Trust in the Employee-Employer Relationship. You can get this online. It's a great article. But briefly, the article describes how the Iowa Center for Advancement initiated a culture change starting in 2016 based on survey results, engagement results that suggested that employees' trust in the leadership was very low. People didn't believe in leadership, that pay was equitable, vacations were equitable, promotions were equitable, all kinds of things came out of that survey. So they
promotions were equitable.
Pardon me? Was there a question? Okay, so this particular organization partnered with UKG, which is a human resource software company, to transform their HR function from a more transactional, paper pushing function to more of a transformational function, so that they could support their leadership in promoting a more trustworthy and more transparent culture. So they were in the midst of this culture change, partnered with UKG to revise policy and procedures to make it more aligned with what they said. They said they trusted employees, but they didn't act upon it. So they went through a large-scale culture building process that was also complicated by COVID, like most businesses today. And this quote is from a communication that they put out to their employees, which is really focused on their well-being, focused on their mission, which was, we trust, we care. Those were two strong mission and value statements that they communicated during the culture change. And during COVID, they used regular communications to emphasize that point. So I don't know how your leaders are communicating now during COVID. I found this quote to be incredibly powerful. I don't know how else you can communicate to employees that you care about them and their well-being, right? And UKG, interestingly enough, was partnering with the Iowa Center of Advancement in their culture change when they started going through a merger and culture change themselves. And their best practices around communication included things like emergency management meetings, intranets, daily newsletters, email access that employees could use to directly communicate with leaders, hotlines, not just hotlines on business, but hotlines around parent care, elder care, financial aid, school support. They have a weekly video series with their CEO. Imagine that. This is 12,000 employees. A weekly video series with the CEO. How important is that? What does that convey to employees? They have coffee with leadership series. But the main thing, whether you use these examples or any other examples about building trust and transparency, what they all have in common is that the communication is more than just this sweeping declaration, we care, we trust, or a poster on a wall. It's consistent, it's credible, and it's authentic. And it's people, leaders saying, we may not have all the answers, but layoffs are a last resort. You know, we're in this together. We trust you're doing the best you can. We'll keep you posted. We'll have weekly emergency meetings as needed. So as you consider your own communication processes, even beyond the COVID environment, these kind of consistent communications are important ways to let employees know that you are valuing them as your most important asset. And one thing that's important to know about the role of leaders here is that it's true if leaders actually convey and the sense of having a way forward, some sense of their own resiliency, the sense of their own ability to withstand and bounce forward and thrive in the face of adversity and use it in a proactive way, that it has what is known as a rally effect. Resiliency is contagious. That's one of the beauties of it, is the more resilient a leader is, the more tendency is for their subordinates and the people they supervise to have those same traits and grow those same behaviors. So to Carl's point, in some regard, resiliency can be learned. Resiliency is like a muscle. It's like a habit. It can be stretched. It can be cultivated. It can be nurtured. And so that's important to do, with the caveat that it's beyond a single leader. Of course, it needs to be instilled in leadership collectively throughout the whole organization. But there is that rally effect that's important to keep in mind. And then just, what happened there? Oh, heck, sorry. Okay. All right, I'm sorry about that. So this is more of a high level overview of cultural levers that you might consider when you're looking at how to create that system approach. And I won't spend a lot of time here. A lot of it's common sense, although it may not be as common as it should be. But when you're looking to build more capacity, build more resilience, combat fatigue, these are all areas we talked about in the risk assessment. Fair distribution of jobs is critical. Recognition rich, we'll talk about that here shortly. Communication, we just gave an example of 2 organizations that have done a stellar job with their communication strategies. All of these things are important. So there are many different ways to slice and dice culture. This is just one example. It's adapted from Burson by Deloitte, but just think about your own culture and what levers you have to be able to move the dial in combating change fatigue. And again, what many people do is they provide tools and resources focused on the individual. Again, the main message is that culture is the key. It's a systemic issue beyond tools and resources for the individual. Certainly individual resiliency plays a big part in organizational resiliency, but over time, if the organization is too stressful and produces a lot of disruption that isn't managed effectively, it will erode individuals' capacity. So social recognition, this is a very simple approach that we often also tend to overlook and underestimate. Just a simple thank you has powerful impact. How many of you have recently received a thank you from your employer or a colleague or somebody that you've worked with? Anybody? Maybe in this community, you've received more thank yous because you're a volunteer community, but a simple thank you goes a long way in the workplace. Men tend to get thank yous more than women, so that's interesting thing to keep in mind there. Gen Z employees say their work goes unnoticed, and that's a primary reason that they feel unappreciated. And then recognition for hard work is something that many employers say would help them feel that the workplace was more humane and more focused on their well-being and their circumstance. So don't underestimate the power of a thank you and a simple gesture of gratitude. Cultures of gratitude go a long way in promoting the kind of connection that people crave and the kind of purpose that people crave when things are uncertain and stressful. I see Anna says, we have a corporate-wide online thank you process. You just made my day. Perfect. I love that. That's a great approach. Yes. And ACMP, people keep handwritten notes. Yes, Doug Conant, some of you may know Doug Conant, ex-CEO of Campbell's Soup. That was one of his trademarks, is that he consistently wrote handwritten thank you notes to employees. And actually, he has a book on that called Touch Points. But yeah, handwritten thank you notes are important. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a short little time here, maybe 2 minutes, and you're going to have an assigned partner. So we've been talking about the role of culture and leadership. So briefly with your partner in chat, you can say your name real quick, but in chat, but type what you believe the strengths of your culture and leadership to be based on what we've said so far, and where you think there might be potentials to move the lever and make things a little bit better to improve well-being and influence things like fatigue or saturation. So just type to yourselves in chat, I don't know if you need instructions, but typically on chat where it says to everyone, you're not going to go to everyone, you're just going to go to your partner.
And
So
if you want to pick the person next to you, so we have Anna and Brenda, Brian and Carl, Carlos and Cheryl. Are we getting the pairs in the list of participants?
Keep going. Just run through the list.
I stopped at Carl and Carlos, right? Cheryl and Connie, Diana Lee and Diana Zhang, Doris and Eileen, Heather and Karen, Leah and Lisa, Mel and Risa, Stacy and Susan. We have perfect pairs if I got my counting.
All right. So we're gonna, my time says 6:20. Is that what you have? Who's got a good, who's the time?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
All right. So can we do 2 minutes max? Because I'm gonna need to make sure you know where everything is in the rest of the material here. So 2 minutes max.
And if anybody's not clear on what we're doing, please unmute and find a partner via voice.
Thanks, Anna, for the Doug Conant website.
So for those playing along, we have 1 minute to go.
Hey, thanks.
Time is up.
All righty, good. Well, hopefully you had some time to compare notes with one another. I'm not going to debrief in the spirit of time that we have left. So please, if you've got people that you want to connect with beyond this session, make sure you capture their contact information and carry on the conversation. But I'm going to wrap up, make sure that you get all the information you need, and then we will go from there. So we looked at cultural leadership, purpose. We'll look at networks and relationship. This slide really just gives you some information about the power of belonging. The other thing that may not be surprising to you about the impact of the pandemic is that it's created a loneliness epidemic as well. More than 53% of employees surveyed say that they have more loneliness because of increased sense of isolation. Connection and team cohesion play a big part in building capacity. So trust and cohesion are important variables. When we look at how to build trust and cohesion in teams, it starts with a purpose, obviously. Simon Sinek says a strong why can help navigate any how. Connection is key. Some of the ways we promote connection: coaching, change networks, communities of practice. Some organizations have weekly, what they call Fridays. Some organizations have collective LinkedIn initiated collective paid weeks off so that people could unplug and regroup. Learning orientation is about a growth mindset and helping people reframe and filter information in such a way that they're looking at challenges or disruptions as opportunities versus threats. So these are some common questions that teams might begin to ask themselves when they're going through a challenge or a disruption or a crisis or change, to kind of get out of that mindset of this is the worst thing that can happen, that how can we make this a positive experience. Also, psychological safety. I'm sure many of you have read quite a bit about the importance of creating psychological safety in teams, but that's that sense that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to challenge the status quo, it's okay to take risks. Gary Ridge, CEO of WD-40, and if you haven't read about his journey as a CEO, he's got YouTube videos, there's lots of articles in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, other articles featuring his exemplary leadership style. But one of the things that he has instituted at WD-40 is the sense that there's no mistakes, there's no failures, there's only learning moments. So, how do you promote that sense of psychological safety in your work teams? And that sense that we've got your back versus watch your back. And then diversity is clearly that sense of belonging, and inclusion is a key component of building capacity and connection. And people are never going to feel included on an organizational level if they don't feel it on a team level. So it's really important to look at how we manage all of those components in our teams. And one thing, some of you may have heard the study from Google, Project Oxygen. It was a 7-year study on productive teams. And one of the things that they learned from that study is that the most healthy, the most high-performing teams were those teams that were not only the most diverse in terms of age, tenure, experience, role, perspective, not just age, gender, ethnicity, but role, tenure, experience. And those teams that were most diverse and that could fight well were more united than those teams that were always focused on agreement and homogeneity and fit, right? So that's an important study. If you haven't seen it, Google Oxygen is a great study to read about the importance of promoting healthy conflict and healthy dialogue and healthy challenging with a diverse team. So one way that you can, psychological safety, yes, Lisa, thank you. So these are sample pulse questions. I'm sure many of you do things like this in your organization, but if you're not doing it, I would encourage you not to make assumptions about how your team is feeling or what their stress levels are, but to continually check in. And these are some questions that you might think about asking if you don't already. But certainly well-being and connection are key components of building capacity and helping people get past that sense of fatigue and loneliness and aimlessness and blah from languishing. So again, let's look quickly at what this means for us in terms of leading and managing change. Change readiness, again, is part of the way that we want to build an organization that can combat fatigue. So these are common stressors. There's probably many, many more than these, but when you look at the list here, consider which ones stand out to you. Scope change, technology, sponsors, lack of capabilities, competing projects, unrealistic expectations, pushback. Any one of those things can cause a project to leak value and get off track, right? So for us, if we're looking at using capacity as a readiness issue, it starts by assessing capacity on the front end and identifying what are the common risks that we typically experience when we're leading change. How are we assessing what our current capacity and capabilities are? How do we keep things in alignment? Are we responding proactively versus just shooting from the hip? Are we being proactive versus reactive? Do we have the right cadence to our projects? Are we sensitive to the impact of change for each project? And one thing to keep in mind when we talk about the impact of disruption is that it's not necessarily the big bang impact that has the biggest stressor or creates the most burnout or fatigue. We sometimes think, oh, it's a big enterprise-wide project that's going to really create the most stress. So this is just a itty-bitty project and a little bitty part of the organization. It's the prolonged exposure, it's those ripple effects, the small ripple effects of continuous disruptive change that create fatigue and burnout, not necessarily the big bang project. So we really need to be sensitive to how we're assessing and what assumptions we're making about people's response. And people need to rest, organizations need to rest, teams need to rest. Saturation occurs up here on an individual level, a project level, and a business unit level. So how do we build rest and recovery into the process? How do we build reflection into the process? This is just a quick example. You know, a lot of talk about managing fatigue and saturation has to do with managing your portfolio more effectively. And that's one part of it. That's the technical side part of it, certainly. And when you're managing the portfolio, you want to be sensitive to places where people have to deliver inputs or outputs at points where they're maybe taxed or overloaded. So this is just one example as you think through your projects. Are there points where we're asking more of one group than they have the capacity to provide? And some of it could be a timing issue. And if you don't know, ask. Some research on effective change from McKinsey. You know, obviously we all want ownership and commitment. Ownership and commitment will come the more we're sensitive to the impact of change upon people and the people responsible for implementing the change. So being sensitive to impact is one way to gain ownership. Prioritizing, focusing on the vital few versus the urgent many will get us more commitment. Focusing on not just getting enough people in and of themselves doesn't help lead change or help implement change. Resources are only an asset if they're competent and capable and have the capacity to do what it is we want them to do. So getting enough people on a project isn't necessarily the best thing. It's making sure it's the right people, the right time, the right skills, the right capacity. So that's part of our readiness planning. Continuous improvement and use of standardized processes. As the world is more and more uncertain and ambiguous, standardized processes like ProSci or project management or Six Sigma or Lean, standardized processes, and I see I'm getting ready to wrap up here, are ways that people can gain support and trust the process because it's going to be the same from one project to the next. And then finally, you know, what we've learned about change and resilience is that we need to build comfort as change leaders, build confidence, competence, and capacity. We want to focus on well-being. We want to use standardized processes, give people the tools that they need to provide to build confidence. And finally, we want to be sensitive to the fact that really the best thing we can do to help our organizations and leaders get through some of these difficult times is to focus on the change experience, and it really is about the people side of change. So how do we know what people's experience is in the workplace if we don't ask? And how do we know how to best frame their change experience unless we take their well-being into account? So those are the key components as sort of that design thinking approach. You start with empathy, consider the needs of your end users and who needs your empathy now. Most of us need empathy today because these are very difficult and stressful times. So we were going to do a breakout. We're kind of at the top of the hour. I think we've gone a little bit over, so I appreciate you hanging in there with me. If we don't have time to do this now, hopefully you'll take some time with one another to kind of think through anything that stood out as a what, so what, or now what for you going forward. And if you're wondering what you can do now, because it is such a hard problem and nut to crack, you can't really pour from an empty cup, right? So it starts with how you take care of yourself and how you support others and practice gratitude. So I'm grateful for the chance to be here with you tonight, and I'm grateful for you taking the time to sit through this webinar during your own time of stress and strain and uncertainty. So welcome any questions or feedback, comments, but thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's been great.
If you have any questions you want to put it in the chat right now, you can. If not, we will go ahead and start wrapping up the session. I wanted to thank you, Holly, very much for the presentation. I think this was really timely. I think this is something that folks can take a glance at and maybe implement some things when they go back into the office, or not into the office, but virtually into the office tomorrow even. Some folks may be in an office. But just wanted to say thank you very much. We'll go ahead and wrap up the recording, and we will be sending this out via our site to our community for those folks who were registered. So you will be able to have access to Holly's slide deck as well. So,
and I've included my contact information. So I do a lot of, I love this topic, and I love to hear stories about what's working well and what challenges people are having. So I would welcome any opportunity to chat with you offline, any of you, connect on LinkedIn, but I appreciate the time and the opportunity to be here. It's been great.
And we thank you. You did a great job. So thanks everyone for joining this evening, and we will go ahead and consider that a wrap.
All righty.
Reach out to Holly via LinkedIn, and if you are an ACMP member of our community, we can continue the discussion in our LinkedIn group. Otherwise, we will connect virtually. So looking forward to talking to everyone again at our next event. And if you are going to be attending Global come the June timeframe, reach out to us and let us know what your favorite sessions are, and we'll provide some time for you to share with the community.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Shauna.
Thank you,
everyone. All righty. Thanks, ladies.
and gentlemen. Carl,
And
thank
gentlemen,
you.
Carl, yes. Carl, I wanted to